A straw man fallacy is the informal fallacy of refuting an argument different from the one actually under discussion, while not recognizing or acknowledging the distinction. One who engages in this fallacy is said to be attacking a straw man. The typical straw man argument creates the illusion of having refuted or defeated an opponent's proposition through the covert replacement of it with a different proposition, and the subsequent refutation of that false argument. For example, to knock down a straw man instead of the opponent's proposition. Straw man arguments have been used throughout history in polemical debate, particularly regarding highly charged emotional subjects. If you ever written a comment or said to somebody any statement that started with one of these phrases, you're probably using a straw man. By your logic, then, so what you're saying, so you think that. Boy, did I ever hear a lot of those this last 24-hour period or so. So I put out a video recently, and it was a fairly unremarkable video, I thought, but then two strange things happened. One, my YouTube stats. You can look at the stats on the YouTube Studio app. I looked at it, and they were way, way different. The average viewing time was about 30 seconds or less, which isn't very much. If your video is only getting you got a 15-minute video and people are only watching the first 30 seconds of it on average, it's not going to be recommended by the YouTube robots to new viewers. And so this video was performing pretty poorly, except it was getting a pretty steady stream of very long, very emotionally charged and angry comments of people writing essay length, like 5-6 pages, typewritten, single space essays based on straw man arguments, meaning they're not actually arguing about what I was saying in the video. They're arguing something else. And most of them were arguing, well, let's summarize this video. Let's summarize it. I had a viewer by the name of Avery Scott who submitted a question and wanted me to talk about the difference between sparring hand-to-hand for combat sports and sparring with weapons. And he wanted me to expand on that, so I did. And I basically said, and I'm going to condense this into as much of a headline as I can, because again, it's a 15-minute video. There's a lot of nuance in there. A simulation is not the same as violence, and sparring is not the same as competition. In combat sports, we perform an action in the gym that is very similar mechanically and physically to what happens in a fight, but even that is not the same. What you do in the gym is not the same as the tournament or the championship fight. What goes on in the cage or the ring, it's different psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, on every other level. It's different. It's much more difficult. When we're talking about weapons, and there are different facets of combat where weapons come into play, aggravated assaults, warfare, and even sport fighting tournaments such as fencing. And once again, practice, no matter how intense, the simulation is not the same as the real thing. Once again, for the same reasons as hand-to-hand combat, but also additional ones. And those additional reasons, well, in actual combat with weapons, somebody's going to die. And therefore, you cannot act the same in the gym as you will in a fight with weapons. It's impossible. And that is not simply because in a fight with weapons it's more extreme, and therefore if you want to prepare for it in the gym, you've got to be more extreme. No, dude. Psychologically, everything about that situation is different. It is more extreme, though, let's be honest. But that was the thesis. It took about 2 minutes to whittle down a 15-minute video there for you. But then I started wondering, why is it that of this video set so many people off? Like I've said, much more inflammatory things, and nobody batted an eye. But all of a sudden, all these people who have never commented on my channel before came out of the woodwork to express their angry words, usually in the form of long-form essays based on a straw man argument. And that straw man argument was, so you're saying that training with weapons is pointless. By your logic, training with weapons is pointless. If I'm following you, you're saying training with weapons is pointless. Not a claim that I made, not the thesis of my video. Look, if you want to engage with the video and attack the actual thesis, cool. If not, you're wasting my time and yours. So I'm wondering, where did this come from? And then this dude in the comments said, congratulations on unifying our two communities. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? You're going to get so many views from this. I'm like, it seems to be working out to the opposite. They're like, this is my least viewed video this month. And audience retention is like the worst out of any video I have ever made on YouTube in 17 years. Like, this is phenomenally underperforming. It's shocking. So, but then I realized what he was getting at. People made reaction videos. People made reaction videos to my video titled, Sparring with Weapons Kinda Sucks. And instead of watching my video to find out why Ramsey Dewey would say sparring with weapons kinda sucks, what does Ramsey mean by that? Well, they formed their own opinions about what that means, and apparently they came to the conclusion that sparring with weapons is pointless. Interesting. Very interesting. So, we got a response from Scholargrim. Scholargrim, I'm actually subscribed to that dude. He makes some interesting videos about HEMA, historical European martial arts, swords and weapons, and that sort of thing. Interesting guy. Go follow him. He's got some fun stuff to say. But his response video started out with a straw man. And the title, once again, is a straw man. Armed sparring is pointless, I guess. He starts the video with a joke, and if you've met the people of the internet, you might already be aware that a lot of these folks don't understand jokes. And either they take them literally, or they don't, and they will get very, very angry and upset about jokes. Anyway, but the joke is based on the straw man, that armed sparring is pointless. This is what Ramsey Dewey is arguing, and I will argue armed sparring has a point. And once again, that's not what we are saying. The thesis of the video, once again. A simulation is not the same thing as violence, and sparring is not the same thing as competing. So, instead of reacting to a reaction video, I'm going to react to some of the comments. There was another video, too. Who was this fellow? The Scholar General has a channel about martial arts, weapons, something like that. Looks like he lives in China. Where does he live? Does he live close by? I don't know. Let me see. He left a comment here with his where he lives. Okay, he says, hey Ramsey, I live about an hour outside of Shanghai. Cool. And I would love to hang out sometime. Cool. He seemed like a cool guy in the video. And I can teach you a few things about Kung Fu that I'm sure you haven't seen or heard of before. Cool. Come on over to Shanghai. Let's train, man. Let's get out there and train together. Sounds like a good time. So, yeah. But the Scholar General, once again, framed his video with a straw man. Is weapon sparring pointless? Response to Ramsey Dewey. Once again, not the topic of the video. And it's very interesting that all the people who are angry about the idea that weapons sparring is supposedly pointless. Not the idea that sparring in the gym for a combat sport is not the same thing as competing. And competing is significantly more difficult and has different obstacles than you will face in the gym. So, if I am to understand this correctly, the HEMA nerds are way more sensitive than the MMA nerds. But at the end of the day, we're all a bunch of nerds. Conan O'Brien put out this sketch a long time ago I thought was hilarious. He would introduce these one-off funny characters with like one personality trait on his talk show. And one of them stuck in my memory forever. It was the jock who knows more about Star Wars than the nerds. And the nerds hate him. And I get it, man. The nerds hate the jock who knows more about the nerdy thing than they do. And reading through a lot of these comments on these channels and my own channel, people would essentially try to tell me, Ramsey, stay in your lane. You don't know anything about weapons, fighting. I would be impressed and kind of worried, actually, if the people leaving these comments knew more about fighting with weapons, knew more about the history of classical warfare, etc. than I do. I would be very impressed if they did. I'm 45 years old. I've been a martial arts nerd, all kinds of martial arts, my entire life. It's what I do, man. It's what I do all day long, every day. Delve into martial arts. So, anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's a high probability, and I'm going to toot my own horn, that I know more about your nerdy thing than you do. Whether you're a HEMA nerd, or a MMA nerd, or a Star Wars nerd. Yeah, man. Star Wars nerds always get really mad when you science Star Wars. Why? Because Star Wars isn't actually science fiction. Did you know that? It's space opera. It's fantasy. It's a fantasy series. Now, it's got some sci-fi-ish elements, but it's not actually science fiction. Science fiction tries to apply fiction through the lens of science. Fantasy, space futuristic fantasy like Star Wars, does not. Let's take a lightsaber, for example. Man, if you took a lightsaber, and do you remember that scene in episode 1 or 2? One of the prequels where one of the Jedi takes his lightsaber and he cuts through this door, which is supposedly made of this metal, which is harder and has a higher melting point than steel. If you look it up on Wikipedia, you can see all the fictional Star Wars metals and their hardness rating and toughness rating and melting points and so on. People actually went into this detail. Now, if you took a lightsaber that was able to melt through like Mandalorian iron, something like that, which has a melting point so much greater than any real metal that we know of in this universe, the resulting heat, the amount of heat coming off of the metal alone, even if the lightsaber had a sheath of force fields around the plasma blade to prevent the heat from destroying the person holding it, from incinerating the person holding it. The heat from the metal, or anything you slice through, if it is hot enough and powerful enough and emits enough energy to cut through Mandalorian iron. Yeah, I know we're going on a tangent. We'll get back to the HEMA nerds in a bit, because we're nerding out about Star Wars. That would be enough to instantly incinerate and evaporate whoever is holding the lightsaber. Now, some nerds have protested and said, well, hold on a second. Well, because they use the Force, maybe they can generate a force field around them, and so any heat from the melting blast door will not affect them because of the Force. Okay, sure. There's an excuse for the Jedi. However, Do you remember that scene in The Empire Strikes Back where Han Solo, not a Jedi, not a Force-sensitive person, takes Luke's lightsaber and cuts open the Tauntaun? Okay. Yeah, a Tauntaun is not Mandalorian iron, of course. It's not metal, it's a creature. But we are to assume that the lightsaber emits the same amount of energy to cut open the Tauntaun as it does to cut open the blast doors. So, it would produce so much heat that not only would the Tauntaun instantly evaporate, possibly explode into a plasma explosion, but the person wielding the lightsaber, in other words, Han Solo, would also. He'd be gone. So, what else do they get mad at? Oh man, we're going to nerd out about Star Wars for a bit before we circle back. Because this is the kind of content I'm putting out right now. I do these things in one take. If it comes to my mind, I'm going to say it. Do you remember? There was a popular video. It got a few million views. It was animated. It was titled something like, just off the top of my head, what Star Wars got wrong scientifically about the Death Star above the moon of Endor and the force fields that they're trying to shut down in the third Star Wars movie. I know it's episode, what are we, 4, 5, 6, but it was the third movie that they ever made. What was it called? New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, the Return of the Jedi? Yeah, there we go. Return of the Jedi. They've made so many Star Wars properties, I'm losing track of them. And they said that the big problem scientifically with blowing up the Death Star above the forest moon of Endor would be that the fallout of the Death Star above the planet would wreak havoc upon the forest moon of Endor and maybe kill the Ewoks and burn down the forest. Okay, if they manage to survive that long. But we are to assume that the Death Star is rather large enough to exert gravity. It's not as big as the moon. It's smaller than the Earth's moon, but it's pretty big. And the forest moon of Endor, we're to assume it is a planetoid moon approximately the same size as Earth or similar to Earth because it exerts a similar amount of gravity, as far as we can tell based on the actions of the actors who are moving as if they were on Earth. I actually went this last summer to the Redwood Forest where they filmed that. It was pretty cool. You can climb up into the trees and those locations where they actually shot the movies. And the very last scene where the Ewoks are parting, pretty neat. I got some footage, but this is going on for a while, so I probably won't edit this and stick it in and show you. It's on my Instagram account, though. Go check that out. The problem with that is that the Ewoks would have died long before the Death Star exploded. The fact that you have a planetoid-sized object, a small moon-sized object, the size of the Death Star, within near orbit, and it is near orbit because you can see it larger than the moon from the surface of the forest moon of Endor. And that's an important distinction. It's not Endor, it's one of the moons of Endor. Endor is a planet. The forest moon that the movie takes place on is one of its moons, covered in a forest, hence the name Forest Moon. Yeah, we're nerding out big time here. What is the point of all of this? The gravitational exertion of the Death Star would have radically affected the winds and the tides of that planetoid, of that moon. And it would have absolutely ravaged the planet, especially since the Death Star was not orbiting the planet. It was in a single location. Now, can you imagine if our moon just stopped moving and just hovered above one place? Let's say it's hovering above New York City. Maybe you live there. And the moon never moves from that spot. What happens to life on this planet? You don't even want to know, man. You don't even want to know the hell on earth that would unleash. It would be bad. Because the moon controls the tides and the winds, and if the moon wasn't moving, it would start pulling everything toward it. Toward, say, New York City. And that wouldn't be good. So, yeah, the Ewoks all would have been dead long before the Death Star exploded. Now, 20 minutes later, we're going to circle back and read some of these comments. I'm laughing because this video is ridiculous. But I'm going to post it no matter what I say here. So let's read some of the comments on Scholar Grimm's video. Let's see here. Where is it? There it is. So it's titled, Armed Sparring is Pointless, I Guess, response to Ramsey Dewey. The first comment. The Gray Pelt says, his argument of, well, sparring isn't the same as an actual fight. I suppose that's a fair assessment of the argument. Sparring isn't the same as an actual fight. We covered that. Once again, a simulation is not the same thing as violence, and sparring is not the same thing as competition. But he says, his argument of, well, sparring isn't the same as an actual fight works against him. Well, let's see how. He can square up with a partner and walk away afterwards because there are rules preventing his opponent. Well, an opponent and a partner are two different things. So are we talking sparring in the gym, or are we talking about in a fight? I assume he means in a fight here. There are rules preventing his opponent from throwing him down. Actually, no, they are not. All throwing techniques are legal, except for the pile driver. And stomping on his head. You know, I actually competed under rule sets that allowed kicks, stomps, soccer kicks, etc. to the head of a downed opponent. That's how MMA was in China when I was competing. Most MMA shows in China now use unified rules which disallow soccer kicks, but I actually competed under that rule set that allowed kicks and stomps to the head of a downed fighter. It's actually not that hard to avoid. It's really not. As long as you're intelligently defending yourself, meaning you're still in the fight, you're exercising basic guard retention, you're going to be fine. You're not going to get kicked in the head. When kicks and stomps happen, and you can see this if you watch old Pride fights or old Art of War fights, etc., fights from organizations that allowed kicks and stomps to the head of a downed fighter, you will see that only happened almost exclusively at the point where the referee should have stepped in and declared the fight a technical knockout, meaning the guy on the ground was no longer intelligently defending himself, meaning his guard retention fell apart. Basically, a dude gets knocked down, hit with a barrage of punches, he's essentially out, it should be a TKO, and before the referee stops the fight, a couple of head stomps in there for good measure. So we saw that a lot in Pride. So I actually did compete under that rule set. So there were not rules preventing my opponents from throwing me down or stomping on my head. Now, I have competed under unified rules as well, and a couple of other rule sets. So, yeah. And this is another thing. I've also competed in Muay Thai. I did a lot of kickboxing matches, Muay Thai, K1, Sanda as well. A lot of people get very upset when they watch a Muay Thai match and there's a sweep, and then on the way down, the falling fighter gets kicked or kneed in the head and knocked out. And people who are used to this idea that kicking the head is illegal in MMA get very upset, and they always leave comments when they see video clips of this sort of thing happening, say on the internet. And they say, that's illegal, this guy should be disqualified for life. That's actually legal in Muay Thai. When you do a sweep, you can kick or knee him on the way down. Once he lands flat on the ground, once he's a downed fighter, you can no longer kick him. But you can sweep and then kick if you do it in the same motion. That's fine in Muay Thai. So it's very important to understand the nuances of the rules. But I don't think I even finished reading this guy's question. Let's give him a fair shake. So he can square up with a partner and walk away afterwards because there are rules preventing his opponent from throwing him down and stomping on his head. Let's steel man this guy's position here, because even though I have competed under different rule sets that invalidate these examples, they are simply examples. Okay, so let's steel man his case. He's basically saying that a MMA fight is different than, say, an aggravated assault where a attacker won't respect a certain rule set. Okay, if we're going to steelman his case there, then it might be a fair statement, except that is not the point that I was arguing in the first place. So it's a straw man. But again, he's not reacting to me. He's not reacting to my video. He's reacting specifically to Skolagrim's video, or more specifically, his title and the intro, which are based on the straw man, armed sparring is pointless, I guess. Let's read a few more of these. Man, I got a lot of replies. Non Sequitur says, Judoka here. We absolutely don't train at 100%. And even when we're competing, we don't gouge people's eyes out and then stomp on their necks, okay? Which is presumably what he means by reality. I don't think Ramsey thought this through after he had the initial idea about comparing a HEMA sparring session with trying to survive attempted murder versus armed ... ellipsis, but nothing else there. I did not compare HEMA to trying to survive an attempted murder. So, in my video, again, it's a nuanced discussion. It's 15 minutes long. And Skolagrim only shows you a few portions of the video, so we don't get the nuance. I discussed a number of different scenarios. I did discuss sword fighting. I did discuss aggravated assault with a knife and several other situations where fighting or training or sparring with a weapon might come into play. So, yeah, once again, this guy is not addressing my argument. He's addressing the presentation from Skolagrim. Back in the day, the knights that actually went into the battlefield trained with practice swords. If it was good enough for dudes willing to chop heads off in battlefields, it's good enough to pressure test with. In 2024, I'm laughing because he said pressure test, and that is a term made popular by self-defense nerds who don't spar, but they want to feel special, so they're like, we pressure test our techniques. So, I've had a lot of arguments with people about that. Not really. People have tried to have arguments with me about that a lot of times, and meanwhile, skip. So, are swords used on the battlefield, as far as the knights go? Sure, but it's very important to understand, swords are, what do we call those? A side weapon, a sidearm, not the main thing, right? Classical warfare, and a lot of people don't know this, classical warfare is not everybody trains in sparring and dueling, etc., and then they go out and it's a free-for-all. That would be a really bad strategy. Classical warfare is you train formations, because formations win fights. If you look at those Russian and Polish team MMA fights that were kind of popular on the internet a few years back, where they had 5 guys against 5 guys, here's how they almost always ended. The guys who had consistent success would target the weak link in the chain first. And as soon as they got rid of one guy, they knocked out or submitted one guy, the team that had 4 would always lose to the team that had 5. And if they had a simple formation, meaning surround the weakling while everybody else is trying to engage in a duel, have a couple of guys surround the weakling and beat him quick so that you can use superior numbers to beat the more technical, larger, stronger fighters, you're almost always going to win. So if we study classical battle formations, simple formations, simple strategies like that, won wars and formed empires. Take the bowl formation that Shaka Zulu used to form the largest empire ever known on the African continent. It's a really simple one. You have a few lines. You've got guys who come up around the edges. You've got the best guys in the very back. Some veterans in the front. And the noob is basically in the middle, the guys who don't have a lot of experience in the middle, right? So they have this initial clash with some experienced fighters. And while they are busy with these experienced fighters, these dudes are running around the back to wedge them in. And the noobs are learning. They're learning from this experience. They're not thrown in to the fray right away. They're not on the front lines right away, but they will engage in battle. So they're gaining experience as they go, in a way that is probably the most constructive you can in that type of formation fighting. And if they end up dying, or somebody breaches that line, because it's not always a matter of dying, it's breaking the formation that decides battles, you have the best fighters at the very end who are going to clean up everything else. And that was a super effective formation. And one other thing that Shaka Zulu did that was way different. Most people would fight with spears back in the day in Africa, in the African continent. And most classical warfare took place with spears. That was the main weapon. There were several phases. One, you'd shoot all the projectile weapons, shoot all the arrows, try to kill people from a distance with minimal casualties on your own side. And then when the ammunition ran out, or the enemy would breach the space to get to almost melee range, the polearms would come out to keep mechanical distance between the enemy and themselves, and then try to poke them to death with the long pointy ends, right? And only then, if they breached that distance, then the enemy could start breaking the line and destroying the formation. And if the formation broke, there was a high chance you just lost that battle. And if you turned your back to retreat, there's almost a 100% chance you've lost that battle and are probably going to die along the way, because most of the casualties happened, again in classical warfare, during retreat. Because that's when you turn your back. And most of the casualties happened with polearms. And polearms are interesting because, again, they put physical and mechanical distance between you and your opponent, making it psychologically easier to kill. Shaka Zulu did something really interesting, and it's very similar to what the Romans did also. He shortened the weapon. And that might seem like a bad idea. Physically it's a bad idea to have a shorter weapon. He cut the handle off the spear, so it was only about that long. Meaning his soldiers had to get close to kill. So why was he so successful if they're fighting with inferior weapons? Because that created superior psychology. So what do I mean by that? Meaning you have to get close to kill. Okay. People are reluctant to kill. And when people have a long pointy stick and they're like, get away, okay? A lot of people in that situation were reluctant to kill with the long spear. And Shaka Zulu and also the Roman legionnaires were put the soldiers in this situation with a short weapon, the short gladius in the case of the Romans, and the short spear in the case of the Zulu, where they had no alternative other than to get up close and personal, and to become the aggressor in the situation. It's funny how that worked, but it totally did. It seems to defy all logic, but it's funny how things that seem to defy conventional logic changed the world, and continue to do so. Let's read a few more comments. By this guy's logic. Once again, if a comment starts with, by this guy's logic, it's probably a straw man, but let's see where he goes. By this guy's logic, all training is useless. Once again, not the logic I used. A simulation is not the same thing as violence. And sparring is not the same thing as competition. That's the logic we used. In Marine boot camp, we practiced bayonet on dummies, and with giant padded Q-tip-looking pidgel sticks, we Granger marksmanship on the range, but nowhere near the same as firing at a target when rounds are flying back at you, and your body can feel invisible death hitting you at any second. Hell in boot. The DIs are in your face screaming at you, trying to F you up, to train your mind to learn how to concentrate when under high stress. Does that fully prepare you to perform vital functions under heavy duress? No, but far better prepared than you otherwise would be. But according to this guy, the United States Marine Corps has it all wrong. And this was a fairly common type of comment I would get on my own video. So you're saying that the militaries of this world, currently and historically, wasted their time because they got out there and trained first before they attempted to fight. No. What I actually said, once again, a simulation is not the same thing as violence, and sparring is not the same as a competition. So that is an example of a straw man. And it's an emotionally charged straw man, too. So if we go back to that definition that I read, straw man arguments have been used throughout history in polemical debate, particularly regarding highly charged emotional subjects. And people get very emotional when discussing warfare, armed services, especially their own armed service, when they feel like that has been discredited somehow. Let's see here. This guy says, I don't practice HEMA to be able to defend myself in the street. I don't think anybody does. I practice HEMA because I enjoy it. I think that's generally the case with HEMA practitioners. Also, swords are cool. I agree. I have a large collection of swords. I like swords. Swords are fun. Unless you're actually fighting with one, in which case a sword fight is an absolute nightmare. Edit. I believe Ramsey is not talking about HEMA at all, but rather about self-defense. I discussed a number of different issues. Including, but not limited to HEMA, self-defense, etc. But again, he doesn't know because he didn't watch the video. He watched a reaction video. Crazy Tom says, BJJ black belt here and long-term watcher. I've grappled in practice and competition settings, also done sparring and striking, boxing, and fenced Olympic fencing for a decade. Never put hands on a person in anger. Hard rolling or competition rolling is frequently pretty much as hard and fast as you can go. Locks are almost never instant damage, and experienced grapplers can control it to allow you some time to tap, but injuries and holds happen. Strangles take a long time to be fatal, but sometimes people do pass out. I would say of 3, grappling, fencing, and striking, you are pretty much able to near completely recreate competition feel and speed in fencing and grappling, but not so in striking. I believe Ramsey's point was largely directed at knife self-defense experts. Okay, that seems like a fair comment, sure. Oh, man. This guy. People often forget that martial arts means the art of Mars or the art of war. I don't think anybody who practices martial arts forgets that. I don't think anybody forgets that. Like, we know, but this comment comes up like, if you don't run a YouTube channel, you may have never seen this comment come up before, and you might have written this comment thinking it was unique and special, but I have read this comment thousands of times. That is not hyperbole. I've read people often forget what martial arts actually means. And I've even made videos myself explaining to people what martial arts actually means. Because apparently people often forget what martial arts actually means. Wow. Okay. Grumpy something or other says, okay, I'm getting tired of this kind of crap. I'm a 20-year vet, and my training of my subordinates included hand-to-hand blades, firearms, and explosives. You must practice and train for the day you need them for real. This guy could be an expert in his choice means of fighting. I don't know him or anything about him. And apparently he also doesn't know what I said in my video. But his comments tell me he is arrogant and not very worldly for combat. All types of combat require practice and sparring. He just made himself look like a complete idiot. Because my assertions were, once again, and this isn't a complete idiot talking, a simulation is not the same thing as violence, and sparring is not the same thing as competition. Completely idiotic thing to say. I know. Gotta love the fact a guy didn't even watch my video and he's like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But a lot of these people, and I'm recognizing some of these names and faces and screen names that left some very, very angry comments. And again, very long ones too. Forming an opinion largely based on the title of this video, Skullugrim's video, that armed sparring is pointless. And some of the guys from this channel, the Scholar General, who also made a video titled Is Weapon Sparring Pointless, where they're reacting to this idea, sparring is pointless. Ramsey Dewey says sparring is pointless. Ramsey didn't say that. Ramsey tells you to get out there and train, dude. Let's read some comments from the Scholar General. This guy says, I remember making a comment on Ramsey's page, about how different angled strikes in empty hand techniques translate to weapon combat. I remember this guy, yeah. And how those odd angled and traveling strikes were useful. He didn't agree, which is fine, as he doesn't have to, but it blew my mind that he thought those techniques were useless. Okay, let's address that for a minute, because I remember this comment, and I feel like he is misrepresenting this conversation. So if I remember it correctly, and I might not, but we're discussing martial arts forms, and specifically martial arts forms that represent grappling movements. So those ones. You see them in karate, you see them in taekwondo. Those are grappling movements. And if you want some bunkai that works, that I use constantly in mixed martial arts training, using those specific moves for grappling. I've got a bunch of videos on those. They're awesome. Go check it out. But in one of those videos, he basically said, this move, this move, this move, this move, and this move, if you hold a sword or a stick or a spear in your hand and do those same moves in the same range, then you will be able to fight effectively with the weapon. And I said, look, no, the range is completely different. If you're holding a spear, for example, you're going to be look, reach matters a great deal in a fight. And my comment to him was not that these techniques are useless. Again, this is a straw man. He is introducing these techniques are useless. Ramsey Dewey did not say these techniques are useless. Ramsey Dewey said this is what these techniques are for. This is how I use these techniques to grapple with. And he said, you can use these techniques with a spear or a sword in your hand at the same distance. No, you can't. Range changes when you have a ranged weapon. Ranged weapon is the wrong term. That generally refers to projectile weapons. But when you have a weapon that creates distance, your footwork, everything about that mechanical process changes. But I see this a lot. I see this a lot when everybody remembers a conversation differently. And looking through some of these comments, I see some people saying things about me like, oh yeah, I watched Ramsey Dewey's video where he said this thing that I totally didn't say. But it's their version of how they understood that thing that I said. Which makes me wonder, am I stupid or are they stupid? This is what I was wondering when I was getting all these angry comments. Am I the stupid one or are they the stupid one? No, it turns out it's neither. It's the fact that they're not reacting to what I said, they're reacting to a straw man that was said about me. Let's see, this guy says, you put it well about the training. Motive is key. Me personally, I've never trusted a word out of Ramsey Dewey's mouth. He thinks just because he's a professional fighter and lives in China, he knows about Kung Fu. He has very little understanding and, frankly, very little respect for the tradition. Huh. Okay, wow, that's, I think just because I live in China, I know about Kung Fu. It has absolutely nothing to do with having trained in Chinese traditional martial arts, man. It has nothing to do with that part, right? I wonder if that's a guy who I called out on his crap before. Because I got a lot of crap on my channel, man. And I do call out the crap when I see it. Let's see, this guy says, always a treat when you post. I like Ramsey, but I stopped watching him because he is too opinionated. Oh. Ah. I should not have opinions. Can you imagine following a YouTube channel where the guy has no opinions? Like, what do you think about martial arts? I think nothing. I have no opinions. I don't think that channel would do very well, man. If you don't express an opinion on the internet, there's nothing worth listening to there. I'm opinionated too, but I have different opinions. And so, okay. Ramsey Dewey has opinions, so I don't like him. I have different opinions. That's an amazing comment. Honestly, Dewey sounded like he's saying, don't train swords, no one uses swords, come train MMA with me or one of my friends. Please, we need money. Well, okay, speaking of straw men, here is the holy grail of straw men right here. Oh, it would be a straw man if he was saying, this is what Ramsey Dewey said, but he's saying, this is what it sounded like. So he's saying essentially, this is the idea I formed in my head while listening. But again, based on the statistics, the most people only listen to this video for about 30 seconds or less. He probably didn't listen to much. In fact, if you listen to less than 30 seconds of the video, I did a little sponsorship blurb for xmarshall.com that makes awesome stuff. So go buy stuff from xmarshall.com and use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything on the website. Oh man, check this out. Just today, they sent me this. It is a new massage gun. I'm super excited about using this. They got massage guns, and you can get 10% off of your own at xmarshall.com. I'm going to test this thing out. I'm going to make a dedicated video to that. I'm going to open that up and have a look. Yeah. So, still in the packaging. Feels pretty solid. Yeah, so we'll make a whole video about that. And you can get your own at xmarshall.com. So, the first 30 seconds of the video were the sponsorship spot for X Marshall. And once again, close to 100% of the people who watched that video watched less than that and are forming opinions. Forming opinions. This guy says, I agree. I've trained in martial arts for at least 40 years, and the injuries I've seen and experienced were from naive sparring sessions with weapons and without weapons, with protective gear and without. In other words, from basically everything. I went live blade against my instructor, and I learned quickly that was stupid. It was a test and lesson that my instructor wanted me to respect the weapon. We went with control, and the various slashes that my teacher left in my hand were only thin paper cuts. That could have been vital cuts, and not to mention ligaments as well. I thank God for mercy. That day forward I realized I'm not immortal. Yeah, that's a very important realization to have. Always use training weapons and have control using them. Use protective gear and have a qualified professional supervising these sessions. Well, this guy is smart. And that's interesting, though, because he is addressing issues that are not really discussed in the response video or in my video, but he's discussing something that's really smart. When discussing training with weapons, there's a right way to do it, and that's what this guy is talking about. Number one, realize you are not immortal. Oh, heck yes, dude. What is this guy's name? I want to give him a shout out. Living in the Truth Ministries. Okay. Does he have a channel? Sounds like he might be like a Christian minister or something. And he is. Okay, cool, man. Cool. Shout out to Living in the Truth Ministries with Driatos. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Okay, cool. Very, very cool comment. Man, that realization that you are not immortal, I think, man, I can tell when having conversations with people that they have not had that realization, and I do not wish violence upon them. I hope they never have to experience it. I hope most people, man, could just live without it. Live without violence. Okay. So I think oh wait, there's a comment. I'm going to read it. Yeah, I also thought Ramsey's video was nonsensical. Like you said, people back then, when there was actual armed melee combat, had the same problem. In fact, we have it better thanks to the progress of technology and all the new materials that allow us to make safe weapons and safety gear. What we really lack, as you pointed out, is actual experience killing each other with melee weapons. Okay, that's a topic we discussed in my video, which apparently he only watched 30 seconds of. But apparently when I say it, it's nonsense. People don't want to hear somebody else's opinion. They want to hear their own opinion coming out of somebody else's mouth. Oh, that's true, man. That is true. I think this was a theme that a lot of MMA practitioners started jumping on the bandwagon when Hard to Hurt did his thing against HEMA as well. Mike did a thing against HEMA? That's news to me. Meh, I chalk it up to the macho version of hoplonphobia, fear of weapons, and sometimes I think it's a psyop for ruling classes to propagandize people to reject effective weapons while they and their private security armors do have them. You can today order a black powder blunderbuss on Amazon and recurve bow to your home. Okay. Wow. Okay, let's read some of the comments on my channel. So here are some of the comments on my channel. This guy says, "Welp, F it." I'm not going to read the F word there, but he said the F word, man. Hurts my fee-fees. Welp, F it. No point in doing any sort of weapons training if it isn't 100% like the real thing. There's a straw man, not what I said in the video. People throughout history have used various forms of weapons sparring to train skills they would require for duels and self-defense. If it was good enough for them, it's good enough for me and you. Why would you be getting into duels, dude? Gun sparring is even worse, not to mention grenade sparring and missile sparring. No kidding. Oh man, I made a mistake coming to my channel because these comments are long. Oh man, this guy delineates 5 separate points, each about 3 pages long, followed by 3 additional very long points that are not enumerated like that. And oh man, people love to type. This guy says, this is a huge matter of nonsensical semantics. The term pressure testing has been used by numerous high-level athletes and coaches in disciplines that we know to be efficacious. You can't possibly convince me that Gordon Ryan and John Danaher are just self-appointed self-defense guru clowns. They have both used the term a lot, in a way that is synonymous with this guy's very angry that I poo-pooed the term pressure testing. I think the term pressure testing is dumb. If you want to say sparring, say sparring. I think pressure testing is dumb. You might not think it's dumb, but it's still dumb, man. You can hate me for that. You can get mad about that. You can write a 16-page comment about that. Please do. This guy says, I'm not really sure what your point is, TBH, whatever that means. All forms of sparring, whether armed or unarmed, exist on a spectrum of intensity and lethality. Again, something that we discussed in this video. I guarantee that your military buddies pressure tested in non-lethal ways before deployment. Yeah, no kidding. They do basic training. One-on-one sparring scenario drills, etc. Again, he's working under the pretense that what was said in the video was preparation is useless. Not what was said. Once again, and for the last time, because we're going on an hour now. Hear me out. Listen very carefully. A simulation is not the same thing as violence, and sparring is not the same thing as competing. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.